A while back, I created a small epoxy table for my daughter. Some of you guys may remember it. She's grown a lot now and she still uses it. Since that project, I've tucked my epoxy away and kind of forgot about it. Now I'm needing a breakfast table and I want to do it out of epoxy. But I just realized my epoxy is old and now I'm wondering, can I even use it? And at this point, I guess we gotta find out. It's either that or I have to buy new epoxy. One way or another, this table is happening. So before we dive into the video, here's a quick message from today's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Private Internet Access, VPN, or PIA for short. Many of us stream content online and occasionally you may get hit with a notification telling you that you cannot watch content in this country. That is known as geo-blocking, when your country is being blocked from accessing that content. This is where VPNs are essential. It hides your IP address and allow you to browse the web anonymously. Your entire connection is encrypted, which means no one can access your online activities. PIA was founded in 2010 and is now the leading no-log VPN with over 1 million paying customers. It's PC Mag Editor's Choice of 2020 with unlimited access to 3,000 servers in 47 countries. As I mentioned, you can browse with no activity logging using their dedicated app on all platforms such as Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, and even more. You can even simultaneously connect up to 10 devices on one account. It's as simple as launching the app, activating that kill switch, and you can be in any country that's available. The biggest question is, who should use this? Anyone that's trying to protect themselves from data leak, identity theft, if you're streaming content in foreign countries, and most importantly, if you're hopping on public Wi-Fi. Right now, PIA is giving a 77% discount, 3 extra months free for just $2.69 a month. Now you can protect your digital activities and your online transaction. For more information, click on my link down in the video description and that'll let them know I sent you. To get started, I'm going to head over to the table saw and cut a sheet of MDF in half. The thickness of this is 3/4 inch or 19 millimeters. I could have also went with 1/2 inch thickness here because I'm going to double it up, but I do prefer the thicker look. Before applying the glue, be sure to wipe off any dust particles. Before sandwiching the two MDF parts together, I'm going to take some salt and spread it over the glue. It should prevent the parts from shifting while you apply clamps. Now, since it is hard to apply clamps on the middle of the table, what I'm going to do here is put weights on top of it to help compress it. I let this sit for a full day undisturbed to give enough time for the glue to set up. The table I'm making is a circle, and the first approach to this is finding the very center, and I'll do that by drawing out a line from two sides, and wherever the line crosses, this should be the center. Now I'll line up the circle jigs with the marking that I have. Now you can build a circle jig and they're actually pretty simple to build. I actually like this model here because you can also cut ovals with it, and I'll link this product down in the video description if you want to check that out. Now that I have the base of the jig anchored down, I'm going to double check with a tape measure to make sure that the routing path is going to fall within this square. As I'm making the pass, I knew this was going to be a long process, especially because I'm using a corded router. And that's because none of my cordless router would fit the jig out of the box. You will have to multitask here if you don't have a vacuum attachment to your router. Removing the dust as you're creating it is the best way to take the strain off your router as you're making the pass around. You can use a jigsaw to cut this circle, but you may not have as good of a cut, and you'll more than likely need some additional sanding after. Before making the final pass, I need to make sure I have support under this. If you let the waste drop, it may cause the MDF to tear, leaving you with a rough surface. So do it in the beginning, do it at the end, whatever makes sense. I need to clean up the edge, and I actually put two different roundovers on this. I put a subtle one on one side and then I put a deeper one on the other side. This way I have options when I'm done. So I have Travis here who's lending a hand to sand this down for me and looking for any imperfection to clean it up. If there's any spot that needed any attention, he applied wood filler to it to fill those in. And based on my past experience, it's a good idea to paint the surface the same color as the base color of the epoxy. The entire top was painted, but the problematic area on these is usually the edge. Depending on the epoxy being used, if it's going vertical, it tends to thin out, leaving a transparent look. Now doing this, it's important to have a leveled surface, and even though I'm on a pitched floor, obviously everything is pitched, so what I did was shim the table underneath to make it level. Now it's been a while since I worked on an epoxy project, and the color of my hardener here can tell the story. Typically you get a year of shelf life from these, and I'm pretty sure I'm beyond that. Epoxy is not cheap, so I don't want to throw it away. Even though it's old, I'm going to give it a shot. Normally you'll want to test this on something small to see if it even works, but not here. I'm jumping right in. Now I wouldn't use this as a clear coat, but I am adding color to this, and I believe that's going to mask it. I'll follow through with the product instructions, and I'll mix this at a 1:1 ratio. I mixed this in container number 1 for approximately 5 minutes. After that, I swapped containers and I added a FX Prime coat to the mix. And I'll mix that an additional 4 minutes. Now I may have added a little more than I would normally, and that's because we have this yellow tint to it that I'm trying to get rid of. Now once I mix this in, it's gonna be on to pouring it onto the table. You can use a paintbrush or a spreader to distribute this on the table. Now that I have the top covered, I'm gonna shift the focus to the edge of the table. If you pour enough epoxy, it'll level itself out, but it doesn't hurt to take a brush or a roller to spread this out. This table is around 48 inches in diameter. The coat I just applied was around 32 ounces, but 48 ounces would have did the trick, giving you a better coverage, but this will work. Now I'll take the blowtorch and remove any air bubbles that may be sitting inside of the epoxy. After about 30 to 45 minutes, you can come around and scrape off the drips. I let this set overnight, came back the next day, and sanded down with 320 grit sandpaper. The reason I added this first thin layer was to get a feel for the old epoxy and make sure it was gonna come out the way I was hoping for. And it did, so now I can go on to the next step. And this is where you would probably start if you had fresh epoxy and you knew exactly what you were going to get. Now after experimenting with the old epoxy, I feel pretty confident. I'm gonna pour a new container, but this time I'll mix a bit more. The majority of this mix will get tinted to white, and the rest of it's gonna get put into different containers, and I'm gonna experiment with some colors. And just like the previous pour, I added a white base to the mix, and this is about 48 ounces here. This is a much better coverage than the first pour, which I expected. After a complete coverage, I took the torch and I got rid of all the air bubbles. Now I shifted my attention over to the smaller mix, which I plan to add colors. One mix was a turquoise, the other mix was a metallic black, and the final mix was a metallic gold. So what I want to do here is what you would call a dirty pour, where you take a few different colors and you mix them and pour them into one container. This is where an experienced person will shine, because you have a good idea on what order to pour the colors, and it will also give you a good indication on what's going to show more. Based on what I learned here, I would have poured the black first, put half of the color of the gold, and then I would have poured the blue third. Now I was hoping for more black, a lot of blue, and a touch of gold. Now I wasn't a big fan of the color blend I ended up with. On top of that, I really hated the design. So right then I knew this wasn't going to work. Even though that pour didn't come out the way I hoped for, I could have nixed that entire segment and just not share that information with you guys. But to me, it's important to be transparent, and this way I can save you guys either from a similar mistake or not giving up on your project. The only bad thing here is I wasted some epoxy, and I'd rather do that than to have to start over from scratch. Anyways, hang with me and I'm gonna show you what I did to get this project to a point that hopefully I like. It did take some work to get the table back to a clean state. I sanded it down as much as I could, then I poured one layer epoxy on top of it. The darker color tends to bleed through under the epoxy, so this second coat here should completely cover up that dark pour. With the same process as before, I mixed up a new container of epoxy, which I'll add black to. I had multiple colors in the previous pour, but I want to go for more of a modern feel, and I feel like that's what a single color will give me. And right out the gate, the black doesn't look like much, but once I start touching it up, it's gonna start coming to life. The section with the black will start to spread out, and that's because the epoxy is trying to self-level. To make this a bit more interesting, I'm gonna use the brush to touch up the edge. As you see where the two colors touch, it's pretty much a hard line. So taking the brush and dabbing it, doing some random things with it, I'll be able to spread that out and feather some of the areas. I'm trying to be creative so it's not too basic, but I also don't want to get too far ahead of myself and start experimenting too wild and go away from the direction that I'm going for. So far, I love where it's going. So just remember, whatever design you're applying to this, just carry that all the way down towards the side to give more of a natural feel. So if you like the direction of the project and you don't really want to do any more to it, you can go ahead and take the torch and just go back and forth and try to remove all of the air bubbles, and that will bring your project to a nice and shiny state. In this location, I tried to touch up a small area, but ended up causing a bigger issue. And because I didn't want to alter the design too much, I chose to leave it as is. Before adding the legs, I'll need to clean up the drips on the table. If you only have an orbital sander, you can use that to sand down the drips, but I do recommend using a belt sander if you have one. That will eat this up a lot quicker. You can avoid all of this while you're doing the pour about 30 to 40 minutes later by just scraping this off. I did that on a few pours, but eventually I walked away from the project, which I ended up in this situation, but it's not a big deal. Attaching the legs was a bit tricky on a round table, at least for me it was. I placed the first leg on the table exactly where I wanted it based on the orientation of the dark strip going through the middle. I plan to reference all of the other legs from that particular location. Once I find the center of the table, I drew a line from the first bracket going all the way across, then I drew another line intersecting that one. I lined up the bracket holes to the lines on the table and set those in about 1.25 inches from the edge. I double checked the spacing between each bracket to make sure they were the same. Since MDF is not as solid as wood, I'm going to use insert nuts here to secure the leg brackets on. The insert nuts have a lip on it, and I want those to be below the surface, so I drilled down twice, one hole large enough for the lip to sit, and then I drilled in an additional hole for the nut to be driven. And if you notice, I have tape on the drill bit, which is a good indication for me to stop drilling when that gets to the hole. Installing the insert nuts is pretty simple, just use an Allen wrench and drive them in. This is MDF, so it's important not to over tighten these, otherwise you end up with spinning threaded inserts. These brackets have their own screws from the manufacturer. The screws are for wood and will not work with these inserts. I need to modify this bracket so that I can use bigger screws. I'll use 4 of the 8 holes because I think this is good enough. I'll line up the bracket to the holes and install the screws. And I'll repeat this a few more times until all the brackets are installed. The legs are threaded, so once you line them up, you twist them on. The legs have an adjustable feet so you can ensure your table is level. Just one more thing before you see what this looks like in my space. Since I don't have any chairs for this table, nor do I plan to build any right now, I picked up an inexpensive set on Amazon. I'm not sure how long they will last, but they're pretty stylish and so far, so good.
Too many days in the darkness, without a glimpse of the light. Running tired and broken and scared, but I swear I'll never give up the fight. I see you broken and beat, head pulled down over your eyes. Every part of you wants to surrender, but darling, you were meant to survive. With every star, we are born again.
There was definitely some bumps and bruises along the way, but overall I think this is a successful project and I'm super excited about it and I can't wait to use it. And a big thanks to Private Internet Access VPN for sponsoring this video. By supporting them, you're supporting this channel. Thanks to my Patreon supporters. Huge shout out to Cliff for being one of the longest running supporters, and huge thanks to James for being the top supporter of the month. If you want to support this channel, there's many ways to do so. Patreon is one of them. Patreon.com/DIY creators. You can go there, support the channel, anything helps. That's it for this one, guys. Catch you on the next one.
You grow to be tall, staring